Throughout the anime and manga of DANDADAN, we have been introduced to a haunted mansion's worth of ghosts, ghouls, and other spiritual entities that all have some form of real-life counterpart. In the last video, go watch it, we covered the cryptids of the series, what creatures served as their inspiration, and some of their abilities. Today, we'll be doing the same, only this time we're going over the spirits of DANDADAN, both their lore within the context of the story, and the Japanese legends they're based on. The only difference is, today we're gonna get sad. A ghost is often regarded as the soul of a once living person that has been doomed to wander the earth as a result of some sort of tragic event that may have taken place in their life, or worse, at the time of their death. This, more often than not, becomes the entire reason that the individual remains as a ghost, whether it be due to some sort of unfinished business in the living world, or a vengeful spirit lashing out in revenge indiscriminately as a result of someone who may have wronged them. We've seen these kinds of stories depicted in countless anime before, in classics such as Bleach and Ghost Stories.
I think she's right. You are retarded.
And even now, we continue to see some of these stories play out in stuff like Demon Slayer, even if it is a little phoned in. DANDADAN is no exception, with some of these spirits having backstories that you'll come to find are absolutely heartbreaking. However, what I think separates these entities from others throughout anime and manga are the fact that not only are they all based on some more underground Japanese yokai, they're cracked out of their minds. Much like the cryptids, the author does an incredible job of adapting the folklore of his homeland and retaining the characteristics of the original legends while shifting things around in a way that makes them much more unique and ridiculously powerful. Seriously, some of these spirits are among the strongest entities in the entire series, and it isn't even close as of right now, with one in particular standing above all else. So it goes without saying that this video will in fact contain spoilers. My name is Kingfisher, and without further ado, let's boo this. You get it? Because we're talking about ghosts and it's Halloween. The first bad bitch we have the pleasure of running into is, of course, Turbo Granny, the infamous speed demon of Shono City. Manifesting in the form of a decrepit, red-skinned old lady with a large head of white hair and glowing orange eyes, she's nicknamed the 100km Granny for her blistering speed when running on foot with no acceleration requirement. Now, I gotta be completely honest with y'all, I'm not as familiar with Japanese folklore as I am with American legends. Shocker, I know. So, when this old hag first appeared, I didn't think she was based on anything more than the concept of an elderly person running quickly. I thought she was strictly the product of the author's imagination. However, and I need to stress how rarely this ever happens, I was wrong. As it turns out, Turbo Baba is an urban legend that's fairly well known in the Japanese countryside. She isn't a traditional yokai like an Oni or a Nakomata, rather she's more of an urban legend that seems to have begun circulating around the 80s. Late night drivers were warned about an old lady that would materialize behind their car in a gray kimono, and upon being noticed by the driver through their rearview mirror, would begin to run towards the car at unnatural speeds of up to 100 kilometers per hour, sometimes on all fours, and if she overtook you, you would be cursed. And as with many urban legends of this nature, there are many different versions of the story. Some say that when she reaches you, she'll begin to bang on your windows and cause you to lose control of your vehicle. Others say that if you make eye contact with her, she'll follow you around until you get into an accident, or even sometimes appear in her own car, after which she'll force the driver into a deadly race. But there are some more tame versions of Turbo Granny. For example, in some instances, she'll just appear, run after you for a little while, and disappear just as fast. Whatever the case may be, it's clear that Turbo Granny came about as a sort of cautionary tale, warning about the dangers of speeding or reckless driving, especially at night. According to the author, Turbo Granny's origin story came to be after a man was chased by an old lady in a mountainous area who had been abandoned there, which apparently stems from a myth that suggests elderly women would often be taken deep within the mountains of the Japanese countryside and discarded in times of food scarcity, a practice known as ubasute. It's worth clarifying that this custom is mostly mythical and there's very little actual proof of it being a common occurrence. But this wouldn't explain why Turbo Granny does what she do, so some people speculate she may be the ghost of an old lady who was killed by a speeding driver, and now terrorizes those who don't respect the rules of the road. The one thing she doesn't do is steal testicles. As I'm sure we're all aware of, Turbo Granny's curse in DANDADAN has nothing to do with car accidents, and instead results in the confiscation of Okurun's balls when he's unable to beat her in a foot race, inadvertently giving him powers in return. She's first encountered within an abandoned tunnel in Shono City after Okurun and Momo agreed to hunt for their respective paranormal entities in an effort to prove each other wrong. It's here that Okurun ends up possessed, and we find out that Turbo Granny is far more than some silly urban legend, but instead a vengeful spirit cursing the boy who invaded her domain. Momo is able to suppress the curse using her psychic powers, however it proves to be pretty inconvenient, and obviously can't go on forever since she would have to be with Okurun pretty much all the time. This leads to a battle with Turbo Granny after the pair challenge her to a race to get to the outskirts of Shono City, a provocation that the old hag can't refuse on account of the pride and confidence that she has in her abilities. This actually sets the tone for how many of the spirits throughout the series will behave, in that they're very arrogant and hardly ever refuse a challenge. Basically, they're really easy to rage bait.
I am strong, do you hear? Strong!
You're weak.
No! I am strong!
No, you're weak.
After a bit of running and some titty sucking, we find out that Turbo Granny's motives for staying in the tunnel are actually pretty noble. As it turns out, she had an alliance with an earthbound spirit that manifested in the form of a giant freshwater crab, an amalgamation of the ghosts of young girls who were assaulted and murdered near the tunnel. It's likely that this is the reason why she took away Okarun's dong, a form of punishment for the men who trespass. Turbo Granny seemed to sympathize with the girls who lost their lives and would console them, leading to their close relationship. So close, in fact, that Granny and the earthbound spirit are able to fuse together. And in case you're wondering why a crab specifically, it's said that souls turn into freshwater crabs when they cross over into the spirit world, according to Seiko. Design-wise, it could also be a reference to the Haikagani, or samurai crab, as the spirit bears the faces of the girls on its carapace, much like the Haikagani shell resembles an angry samurai. After the earthbound spirit is exorcised and the girls' souls are put to rest, Turbo Granny evidently remains in Okarun's body, after which her consciousness is extracted by Seiko and transferred into a Maneki Neko doll, that little cat that you see in Asian markets and restaurants with the golden bell. They're believed to bring good luck to the owner, which, funny enough, is an ability that Granny claims to possess in her newfound form when watching Acrobatic Silky burst into flames, saying that there are no such things as coincidences when she's around. Her powers, however, remain in Okarun, giving him the ability to shift in and out of his spirit form at will. By the way, this isn't technically referred to as a spirit form throughout the series, but I'll be doing so when referring to characters like Aira and Gigi, since they too have transformations, for the sake of brevity. Speaking of which, her powers extend far beyond anything from the original urban legend. For example, she's able to teleport using cellular devices and connections, an ability that we see when she's able to infiltrate the Serpo's spaceship through Momo's phone. This skill is further expanded upon in the manga, specifically in the Space Globalists arc. Skip here to avoid spoilers, where Turbo Granny explains to Okarun that he too can do this in his astral form so long as he understands the power of spirals. Everything in this world, from DNA to the arrangement of seeds on a sunflower, is made of spirals, including the magnetic field surrounding phone lines. By moving with the spiral instead of against it, Turbo Granny and apparently other spirits are able to essentially teleport via electrical devices to wherever she pleases. While this is never referred to in the original legend, I believe it may be a reference to how Sadako from The Ring can do the same, though this is just my personal theory. And as if you needed any further evidence as to how good DANDADAN is as a series, only the best anime harness the power of the spirals. Turbo Granny also possesses immense spiritual power, as she's able to make Seiko, who is canonically one of the strongest characters within the series, bleed from her nose after exerting her spiritual pressure while Okarun was taking a dump. We also see her manipulate the areas around her domain early on, making arms sprout out from inside the tunnel to capture Momo. Because of this power, her reputation precedes her in the spirit world, with Seiko even stating that she's been hunted by exorcists for a long time. In spite of her initial malevolence, she has since become an essential member of the main cast and has warmed up to Seiko and Momo significantly despite their earlier disdain for one another. However, whereas Turbo Granny was essentially Stockholm syndromed into the family, our next yokai had no such troubles. Call me an occult Nazi, but I'm often very critical of how some series utilize their supernatural characters and which creatures are being referenced. Usually they're quite surface level, stuff like vampires, zombies, witches, and what have you, which is why I really appreciate when creators go out of their way to pay homage to much lesser known entities. Yuki Nobutatsu already proved that he isn't some poser and is truly deep into this whole occult thing with the presentation of the Dover Demon and the Typhoon Human, but stuff like this really reinforces his passion for the supernatural. Acrobatic Silky is the second major yokai who appears in the series that would eventually be the source of Aira's power. She is depicted as a ridiculously tall, slender woman with a constant smile flanked by red lipstick, a wide-brimmed hat, long black hair, and a flowing magenta dress. Her appearance bears close resemblance to the spirit she's based on, a more underground yokai that originated in online Japanese forums in the early 2000s. Also known as Acrobatic Sarasara in the Land of the Rising Sun, the original Spectre is nearly identical to Dandadan's rendition, only her dress is more explicitly red. She's similar to the real-life Turbo Granny in that she's more of an urban legend and has similarities in how their encounters will play out. It's said that Acrobatic Silky will approach groups of people or individuals in quiet areas like a park or a street at night and begin to perform feats of athleticism such as handstands, climbing trees, and jumping from building to building before disappearing without a trace. Essentially, she athletically mogs you and then leaves. However, whoever witnesses her acts will become cursed, doomed to have some form of misfortune fall upon them or a family member, which could include injury or death. With the way that these encounters play out, it's possible to draw some parallels between this and the fabled Slit-Mouth Woman. And I say this without shitting on them because I do genuinely enjoy these yokai, but a lot of these Japanese urban legends occur in very similar ways. Regardless, she is undoubtedly much more obscure than other myths, and just like before, I had never heard of her prior to reading up on it. As far as I could find, there is no single origin story for why she terrorizes people with her smooth moves, nor do we know why she's a ghost. So the author of DANDADAN decided, let's do something about that. Acrobatic Silky had a daughter when she was alive. She was a single mother and was in debt, meaning that she had to work several jobs to keep themselves afloat, including a store clerk, janitor, and even prostitution. We never find out what happened to the father, however, we can assume that he abandoned the two of them early on. Amidst all this, she continues to provide for her daughter the very best way she knows how, spending lots of time playing with her, buying her dresses, and teaching her how to dance, which she is clearly experienced in, suggesting that may have been what she was doing professionally prior to the birth of her child. It was a hard life, but her daughter was happy. And it all came crashing down when the collectors of her debt, presumably Yakuza, came and destroyed their apartment, beating her bloody and kidnapping her child in what is a gut-wrenchingly animated scene. Despite her injuries, she was able to pick herself up and run after her daughter, but to no avail, collapsing on the rain-soaked pavement. Afterwards, she climbed onto the roof of a tall building and put on one final performance before jumping to her death. It's important to note that Tatsu specifies in the manga that her daughter did in fact die, whereas the anime leaves it a little more ambiguous, although it's heavily implied. It's also worth mentioning that, whether on purpose or not, this story draws some parallels with La Llorona, the famed Latin American story of a woman mourning the loss of her children after she drowned them in a river. The most notable difference being that Silky did not kill her daughter. Following her death, Silky's spirit roamed the streets aimlessly, feeling like she had lost something valuable to her, but unable to remember what, until a young Ira tugged on her dress after confusing her for her own recently deceased mother. It's likely that the death of Ira's mom made her sensitive to spirits for some time, which was why she was even able to see Acro in the first place. Because of this, Silky imprinted her daughter's image onto Ira and effectively became a yokai, following the young girl until she touched one of Ogurun's jewels and had her spiritual power awakened. Because his testicles are covered in a golden sheen of Turbo Granny's spiritual energy, people's sensitivity to yokai is bolstered after touching them, allowing them to see the spirits even if they weren't able to before. Following the reveal of Acrobatic Silky, we're then introduced to her powers. Most notably, she's able to manipulate her hair to grab onto whatever she wants, ensnaring her opponents and even using it as a form of traversal. As her name suggests, she also possesses supernatural acrobatic abilities, including immense speed, endurance, and strength. These powers are proven to be devastating in later chapters of the manga after Ira successfully used them to crush her opponents in pretty creative ways, even harnessing the power of the spirals. It's clear that her dancing abilities from life influenced her fighting style in death, as Ira becomes very nimble and almost ballerina-like when facing off with enemies. Also, the girl's personality seems to change in her spirit form as well, becoming much more foul-mouthed and vulgar, a similar contrast to how Okurun becomes much more laid back when he's transformed. After an awesome bit of body horror following the battle between Okurun and Silky, in which she rips apart her jaw, she offers her aura to bring Ira back to life. After all, in her eyes, she was simply sacrificing herself for her daughter. We see Silky express regret at the fact that she brought a child into the world and blamed herself for their misfortune, during which Turbo Granny introduces the concept of the void, which is essentially just the story's version of being stuck in limbo, an infinite nothingness designated for souls who didn't find peace and are destined to be forgotten. That is, until Ira hugs her and says that she was happy, as if she was her own daughter, embracing her mother to reassure that she did her best to provide even when things were bleak, and that she did a good job. It seems that with this, Silky was thankfully able to find some closure in her story. Ira held her there in her last moments, crying and even praying for their souls to be guided and to find each other again in a kinder world. I got sick while making this, so if my voice sounds any different from this point on, there's your explanation. I was cursed. Cursed by Turbo Granny's giant bazonga, a spiritual manifestation of hate and unyielding anger, born from a child sacrificed at the stake over frivolous beliefs over 200 years ago, vowing to exact revenge against all of humanity as punishment for the horrid life he was forced to live. He's probably my favorite in the series. As the third major phantom introduced alongside the Mongolian Deathworm, the Evil Eye belongs to a group known as Mountain Spirits, who, in Turbo Granny's words, are total badasses, a classification of yokai seemingly on a whole nother level than everyone else. She even points out how the particular evil eye that we're dealing with is quite young, meaning that the power we see him exhibit is merely a fraction of its true potential. In fact, nearly every spirit in the series, Turbo Granny included, is merely a member of a group, meaning there are likely more Turbo Grannies and Acrobatic Silkies out there. Contrary to our last two lovely ladies, this guy is not based on one single story or real-life ghost, but is rather a concept, one so old that anthropologists believe it may have originated in ancient Sumer. The evil eye is more akin akin to a curse than a yokai, a widespread belief spanning across nearly every culture throughout history. I'm talking Greek, Mexican, Middle Eastern, African, Indian, and is even referred to both directly and metaphorically in the religious texts of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. A product of envy, those who have an evil eye are said to look at others with a glare that casts unto them misfortune. Some individuals may be aware of their abilities, while others might not have a clue. In some cultures, the look doesn't even need to be envious. For some background, I am Cuban, and I've heard stories from both my family and my girlfriends of people they've known with evil eyes who congratulate others only for something awful to happen soon after. For some, it's a belief that is deeply entwined in their religious practices. For others, it's nothing more than a superstition. Regardless, that doesn't stop people from creating ways of avoiding this supposed curse. These practices largely depend on what part of the world you're in, but as an example, many people in Latin American countries often give newborns a sort of charm attached to a bracelet that looks like this, and if said charm breaks at some point, it means that the individual has been protected against the curse. This is due to the belief that because of their innocence, babies and children are often more susceptible to the effects of the evil eye. This recurring theme of jealousy and envy is one that we see displayed by the evil eye in DANDADAN, as he observes the other children dancing in the fields and wishing that it was him out there, even performing the same dance. And I mean, I can't really blame him. We're never told how long, but judging by the visible malnutrition, it seems as if the Quito family kept him in prison for some time, possibly several weeks before he was finally sacrificed in the name of the Tsuchinoko. Over the years, he watched as the cryptid psychic waves drove the parents of many to suicide, only for the child to be sacrificed to the worm by the Quito soon after, burying the house every time and rebuilding a new one above it. While trying to help one of the kids in question, his anger grew to a boiling point, after which his soul appears to have fused with the child to birth a fledgling spirit yearning for the destruction of all humanity. And since then, his gaze has become so powerful that merely making eye contact with him can drive people to suicide, making him a true, bona fide evil eye. Gigi would then learn of the spirit's backstory upon looking at him in the eyes, after which he offered to play with him, which to the spirit was basically just permission to possess his body. Of course, this then led to the manifestation of Gigi's spirit form, which remains one of the most powerful in the series, harnessing the anger behind all the souls of the children that were killed in the name of superstition. He's able to condense and manipulate these grudges, turning them into a soccer ball that ricochets off surfaces with devastating power, able to pierce the Mongolian deathworm several times over. With these same grudges, he can even manifest a cursed house that forms a physical barrier to keep things both in and out as he sees fit. And with Gigi as his vessel, his physical ability is even further complemented to the point of madness, with enhanced strength, reflexes, speed, and durability that makes him nearly unstoppable unless you're Okarun on a Tuesday. The one thing the evil eye didn't account for was how powerful Gigi's spiritual abilities truly are. See, he's a bit of a goofball. The ghost initially possessed Gigi because of his spiritual resistance. Hell, it's the only reason he's even able to tolerate the evil eye inside him. Any other person would keel over immediately. But it's because of this endless well of spiritual energy that Gigi is able to eventually get a good enough grasp on it that he can suppress the spirit of the evil eye, until he's exposed to cold water in what I'm sure is a reference to Ranma. Despite a series of unfortunate incidents, the family is able to placate the evil eye's bloodlust following Gigi's possession temporarily after Okarun rage baits him enough to agree to only fight him on Tuesdays and to not hurt anyone else until he beats him. Physically, the spirit's appearance is likely based on an entity called the Ochonan from a manga titled Fuan no Tane, or the Seeds of Anxiety. The vertical eyes are a big indicator of this. He's also incredibly tall in his spirit form and really only wears underwear, suggesting an aversion to clothes. He's just like me for real. Of course, in order to actually stand a chance against the evil eye in combat, Okarun had to go through some pretty intense training to put himself on the same level as such a powerful spirit. So he decided to fight Beethoven. I think the DANDADAN English dub is significantly better than the sub. Yes, the sub voice actors are very talented, but because of the insane dialogue and pretty modern expressions that a lot of these characters use to communicate, it feels like the dub actors were able to have a ton of fun in the studio and keep things generally unique when making the changes from Japanese to English. Not to mention, the sheer talent of the performances themselves never fails to shine throughout the series. Even in the most serious moments, these guys give it 110% and it frickin' shows. That being said, the dub also sucks dick. For whatever reason, in the latter half of Season 2, when Aira and Okarun are brought to the school by Turbo Granny for a training exercise, they forego one little detail, and that is what these guys are supposed to be. Sure, they explain the definition, conveying the fact that they're manifestations of thought brought into spirit form, but unlike the manga, they don't refer to them as what they truly are by name, tulpas. Then again, the sub doesn't do this either, so this entire rant is low-key pointless, but I do genuinely believe that the English dub is superior. That wasn't a joke. That was me being for real. A tulpa is not a spirit or a ghost per se. Rather, it is the physical materialization of a human thought, which, according to some, can be achieved purposefully through intense concentration or religious practice. For example, if I were to really put my mind to it and imagine, let's say, the coolest thing ever as a physical object, it could, in theory, manifest before me as something tangible if I put enough thought to it. Of course, doing so on purpose is a practice known as tulpomancy, and is generally seen as, let me check my notes here, a load of barnacles. The word tulpa is actually derived from the Buddhist concept of emanation body, which is essentially the physical form that a Buddha takes to be able to guide sentient beings to liberation. It is sometimes referred to quite literally as a thought form, which William Atkinson, an occultist, describes as simple ethereal objects emanating from the auras surrounding people, generated by their thoughts and feelings. Atkinson would then go on to describe how occult practitioners could harness their auras, presumably by farming, and produce thought forms that serve as astral projections of themselves, or illusions that are only visible to those with quote-unquote awakened astral senses. This might seem irrelevant, but I'm mentioning it because they're both concepts that we see in DANDADAN, with Momo's powers being entirely centered upon seeing the auras surrounding objects and manipulating them, and Okarun experiencing astral projection later on in the manga. I feel the need to specify that this is all strictly belief and there is no chance that one can actually create something from thought alone, but that certainly didn't stop the tulpomancers of 4chan and Reddit when they attempted to use these techniques to create imaginary friends from My Little Pony. This might also seem irrelevant, and that's because it is. I just felt like you should suffer the same mental image that I did when researching. But as far as tulpas go in DANDADAN, these guys actually fall under the umbrella of thoughts made real as a result of collective fear. Their paintings inhabit the music classroom of the school, and because of this, the fear of those students who may believe these famous musicians may look down upon their performance essentially brings them to life. It's kind of like how Slender Man took the world by storm at some point, making so many kids afraid of him that some people thought him to be real. The only difference here is that the musicians actually exist and they possess some deadly abilities. There are 6 official music room portraits: Ninth, Mozza, Trainspotter, Glasses, Bach, and Van Ben, and they can all be summoned when playing a musical instrument horribly within that classroom at 2 in the morning. They all play a different instrument, and with it are able to practice symphokinesis, manifesting insane illusions that transport both Okarun and Aira on different fields of battle, one of which being a literal rice paddy field, a technique known as Symphony No. 6. They can also levitate in the air with their instruments as they play, thanks to Ninth. Their primary method of attack is hurling a barrage of physical, visible musical notes towards their opponents that explode on impact, effectively making them bombs. Whole, half, quarter, eighth, every single one of these notes. 16, 30 seconds sharp, flat, with the exception of the rest, which causes the individual to freeze for a beat after coming into contact with it. And give me 1 second, this shit is fire. Their second, more powerful technique is referred to as Symphony No. 9 Chorus, in which the musicians manifest an enormous concert hall with hundreds upon hundreds of choir members and 4 distinct giants, who sing opera. Aside from the killer performance that they put on, they're also relentless in their pursuit of Aira and Okarun, swarming them in the thousands before our 2 heroes are finally able to defeat the musicians after brute forcing their way through the crowd. However, even after the fight, the tulpas aren't exercised for good. Rather, they are simply returned to their respective paintings. And I forgot to mention this earlier, but there is very likely another inspiration for these deadly dudes, being the 7 School Mysteries, a series of urban legends common in Japanese schools that encompass a series of different supernatural occurrences. Of course, the specific story that the author likely used as a reference was the haunted painting of Beethoven. Schoolyard rumors tell of a photorealistic portrait of the famous composer often located in the music room. And as for the specifics, it's your basic haunted portrait shtick: eyes that follow you, hearing faint music around the painting, and even a curse that can lead to misfortune for those who spend too much time around it. Of course, this is only one of the 7 mysteries that are commonly talked about, and it's very clear that more than just one of these stories was used as inspiration by the author when coming up with some of these entities. This is Taro, an anatomical model, and this is his girlfriend, Hannah. They are both inspired by the infamous urban legends surrounding rumors of anatomical models coming to life in Japanese schools when nobody is around. They're also deeply in love. Evidently, haunted anatomical models are a big thing in East Asian cultures, primarily in Japanese schoolyard stories passed around by young students. Some of these tales specify that these models are haunted by spirits of dead humans, while others claim they're literally just alive, but only move around at night and enjoy playing pranks on others, putting themselves in places they weren't in the day before, and things of that mischievous nature. It's one of the infamous 7 school mysteries, much like the Beethoven portrait that I spoke about in the last section, and a couple other entities including Hanako-san of the toilet, which is essentially just Japanese Bloody Mary, among others. In Dandadan, however, Taro is anything but a prankster. Rather, he's madly in love with Hana, a female model with no arms and legs. How noble of him. We never really get an explanation as to whether or not they're haunted by some sort of yokai or just alive, but judging by the fact that they can indeed feel pain, as illustrated by Taro screaming after Momo squeezes his heart, I'd wager that the latter is likely the case. Although we never see Hana do this, Taro is able to deconstruct and reconstruct himself at will, even after exploding into thousands of little pieces when he got hit by a car. In fact, we see this ability at its best when the inner walls of his body were lined with protective talismans that were used in conjunction with his reconstruction ability to prevent the evil eye from taking control of Gigi's body following his possession. He's also ridiculously fast, able to outrun Okuru in spirit form early on in the show after their initial encounter, coupled with stamina that allowed him to sprint several miles down the road from their high school to the junkyard after Hana was scrapped for being an obsolete model. They reunited, of course, and the ISA residents took her in so that Taro could visit her at night, since he spends his day in school as the resident model, an occupation that he seems to treat like a legitimate job, which is both respectable and incredibly hilarious. I guess I could also mention the fact that both the names Taro and Hana are considered to be very, very generic in Japanese culture, similar to the American John Doe and Jane Doe. But with that, we've reached the end of the video, and I'd like to take a moment to formally apologize to all of you. I wanted to have this video be a fully fledged version with every single spirit from both the anime and the manga present, but as it turns out, there are way too many in the series, which would have prevented me from having the video put out in a timely manner due to some personal issues that I got going on in the real world. So this is part 1 of the spirits of Dandadan, and part 2 will be coming very soon, detailing the real myths and legends of every yokai that is strictly in the manga. If you actually made it to the end, then I'd like to thank you for watching. And if you enjoyed the video, then I'd encourage you to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And speaking of helping me out, I'm gonna start having channel memberships from here on. Starting off, there will only be one tier at only $3 a month. Any and all members will have their name shown on screen at the end of every video and early viewing for future projects. Thank you so much in advance if you do decide to join, but even if you don't, I still appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. And with all that, this has been Kingfisher, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.